Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews. Bite me once, shame on you. Bite me twice. Bite me 3 times. Just bite me, please. Tonight, let's talk about 1985's Once Bitten. Probably best remembered as Jim Carrey's first starring film role. Once Bitten is your classic cliché cheesy 80s teenage sex comedy. Except with vampires! This vampire, played by Lauren Hutton, needs to find a virgin to drink from 3 times before Halloween. But not just any virgin. She wants a male who's over 18 because, come on, she may be a blood-sucking vampire, but she's not a deviant, for goodness sakes. Her problem is that wherever will she find a boy of 18 in LA who's still a virgin in this day and age of 30 years ago? Jim Carrey plays Mark, an 18-year-old high school student who desperately wants to have sex with his girlfriend of 4 years, Robin. Her stance is this.
I want to, I really do. But I want it to be special.
I mean, understandable. Akar's not very romantic. She's a teenage girl in the 80s. I can tell you right now what she wants, Mark. She wants satin sheets and candles and Kenny G. Maybe a bearskin rug in front of a fireplace. Put that together, buddy, and you'll both be super happy. Trust me. But apparently, Mark still hasn't figured that out over the course of 4 years, so his solution is instead to get laid elsewhere to take the edge off his sexual cravings, so that way he'll be able to wait longer for Robin. Because otherwise he would rape her? But at the club, he runs into the vampire. Hijinks ensue. So this script was a first-time screenplay by someone who you've never heard of because he never did anything afterwards. Surprise! And though director Howard Storm was prolific in television, this is his only feature film credit, and it shows. The whole thing feels much more like an extended sitcom episode than a movie. Co-writing credit goes to these guys, and it was produced by these guys. Anyway, the point of me mentioning all these fellows is that this is a film about a female vampire. A few years back, I designed a list of my favorite female vampires who defy or subvert that cliche vampire lady thing of being portrayed as sexualized objects. The vampire in this film did not make that list. The screenwriter actually originally conceived the role for none other than Elvira. I don't know if she was ever actually offered the part, but she was what was in his mind when he was writing the role. And I can definitely see the similarities, especially stylistically, but there is one huge key difference here. You see, when it comes to sexualized ladies, there is a line between female objectification and female empowerment. Elvira is awesome. I love her. She's so sexy and funny and confident and amazing, but she is not an object. Do people objectify her? Undoubtedly, the same way any person can be objectified even if they dress in the most conservative of fashions. But Elvira's image is one she is in control of, one she's cultivated herself and uses as she sees fit. And that control is what makes the difference. When a woman chooses to dress or act in a sexy way, it does not automatically make her an object. If she has the control over her circumstances and feels empowered by it, then that is sexual empowerment, not objectification. Also, Elvira is so much more than her looks and style. She's a complex, nuanced character. She has a life and interests and layers of wants and needs that have nothing to do with her looks.
But if they ever ask about me, tell them I was more than just a great set of boobs. I was also an incredible pair of legs.
She can make jokes at the expense of her image, and they're all the funnier because we know she's deeper than that. She's a person who wants love and companionship and community and good movies to watch. She's a fleshed out, confident, empowered person. And the actress behind her, Cassandra Peterson, goes even further to use the Elvira image to promote causes she's passionate about, like animal rights and gay rights. So now let's compare the vampire in Once Bitten. On the surface, it seems like we have here a very powerful vampire character, confident and in control of her sexuality. So why is this objectification instead of empowerment? Now, no doubt there are people who may feel empowered by this character, or at the very least the actress who is playing her, but at the end of the day, this is a character that was created by a team of men for the sake of titillation, not to be a role model. The control over her sexuality is not hers. It belongs to others designing her and consuming her. Her entire character is reduced to her looks and body. You see, the reason she needs to drink virgin blood isn't because she's going to die or has any kind of grand vampire philosophy. No, it's because if she doesn't, she'll become old and ugly. You know, the only thing women really care about. Everything she does in the film is centered around her looks. She doesn't have any other interests or hobbies or relationships or personality traits other than to serve that end. She doesn't even have a name. She's just the Countess. Even though she's a physically powerful character, being an ancient vampire and all, that doesn't make her empowering or empowered. It's the same as the concept of giving a sexy lamp a gun. These trappings and symbols of power don't make her a strong character. As a person, she is underdeveloped and her motivations are so shallow.
It's as if I were young again.
I'm actually super glad Elvira didn't take this role, because for her to play a nameless object would have undermined everything she did for sexual empowerment.
Now, is it true that you've had sexual fantasies about being involved with a vampire ever since you were a little boy?
It's very true.
Is that true?
I had all the monster models, you see, and the Vampirilla thing came out. It was like a wow, you know, it just drove me crazy with that tunic she wore and stuff. And
so here you are.
And so yeah, no, I mean that was the only one of my monster. I had all the models, and that was the only one left with no paint on it. And every time my parents left the room, it was make a wish.
In case you don't know what the doll he's talking about looks like, yeah, we'll talk about Vampirilla another day. But female vampires have quite the history of being treated as a fetish. So the Countess is a prime example of what I made my old top 10 female vampire list against. Why is she working out? She drinks virgin blood to stay hot. Is it just an excuse to wear tight gym clothes? But the fact that she's female is the huge twist of this film, because the classic trope is you have a male vampire like Dracula seeking the blood of virginal young maidens. Which of course there were plenty of back in oldie times when everyone was pure and good and innocent. Yeah, if you actually think about it at all, the premise kind of falls apart. Kids these days having sex so early before marriage. But in olden times, people got married earlier. So I don't know how finding an 18-year-old version was supposedly so much easier then. This same joke was the premise for the 1974 Andy Warhol film, Blood for Dracula. Dracula goes to Italy in search for virgins because, as it's such a religious country, he hopes the Catholic girls will all be saving themselves till marriage. It turns out he is wrong. So, if the joke is that people are less religious now in this modern day and age of 1985, and therefore not waiting till marriage, but the joke is also that religious people are secretly as sexual as anyone, and people are getting married later now, but they're also not waiting till marriage, and I don't see how or why finding a virgin in LA is supposedly any harder for the Countess than it's ever been. But apparently it is. So, for her to find a male virgin over the age of 18? Well, she's just going to have to find some kind of loser who can't get laid. And as we all know, there were like none of those in the 1980s, so whatever will she do? Oh wait, there's 4 right there. Never mind, she's good. Yeah, the film does nothing to actually confirm this supposed state of affairs because the entire main cast are virgins. Despite how silly and full of holes this movie is, they at least do set up some strict rules this vampire has to adhere to by supernatural law or her own preference.
The closest we've come so far is an 11-year-old.
Don't be disgusting.
She's got to find this virgin and drink from him 3 times before Halloween. She can use her looks and charms to seduce him, but she doesn't have any kind of mind control, so getting this squirrely, uncertain loser of a guy to let her bite his femoral artery 3 times is a challenge. Before Jim Carrey landed this breakout part, he'd been most famous for his impressions. So this was a chance for him to really act in a role of his own. He's uncharacteristically subdued, but even though he's most famous for this, he's still a good actor. Playing a scared, twitchy, awkward, but generally sweet teenage boy, he works in subtlety. He can walk into the nightclub and just look scared, and it's funny. They were trying to figure out some sight gags to put in this scene or something awkward to happen to him, but they couldn't come up with anything. But then his acting saved it for them. He's good when he's playing straight. And Jim Carrey didn't really get the chance to do this again until he starred in The Truman Show. He does get a couple moments to Jim Carrey out, but the film is better off for focusing on his sincerity. Now this is a movie about sex, and when you make a movie about sex, you should say something about sex. And one of the biggest flaws of this film is that its message on sex is contradictory and confused. We all know the horror film trope of the teenagers who have sex are the ones who get killed. Promiscuity is to be punished. And it's really the inclusion of the vampire in this film, comedic or not, that muddles any effort to either enforce or subvert that trope. When Mark goes out looking for sex, he is victimized by a vampire that infects him with her curse. A clear metaphor for STDs and the dangers of promiscuity. However, his lack of sexual activity is also the only thing that makes him a target for the vampire in the first place. So sex is also a protection from evil. And the constant harping on the dismal state of virginity frames sex for the audience as something you'd better be having, otherwise you are a loser.
You see, the female vampire needs the blood of a virgin. And an 18-year-old boy would hardly be a virgin now, would he?
Well, just hypothetically, what if he was a virgin?
Well, then I think he has a lot bigger problems to worry about than female vampires.
But if you do go after it, this happens to you. Which is it, movie? Are you sex positive or not? Well, clearly the true evil is a society of double standards. This film isn't smart or insightful enough to actually be making that statement, though. It's just a victim of it. It focuses on jokes and one-liners at the expense of depth or logic.
Mark doesn't want you because you're mean and evil. He wants me because I'm nice and sweet and pure. So fuck off!
Haha, it's a funny line because the one F-bomb allowed in this PG-13 movie gets said by the pure, innocent, virginal girl. How ironic. But the line itself doesn't really make sense. Mark doesn't want Robin because of her purity. He seems to love her in spite of that. He never idolizes innocence. He doesn't seem to put that much thought into it at all. Robin saying this is insight into her own issues with purity, placing value on herself for that, which is understandable as shaped by society, but that Mark doesn't do anything to fuel those issues is refreshing at least. At the end of the film, Mark escapes the vampire by having sex with Robin before Halloween, and thereby no longer possessing the virgin blood the Countess requires. He went through hell, but he finally got laid. But did he learn anything from it? And what about Robin? What's her arc here? She lets go of all of her romantic notions of how she's been dreaming about what her first time would be in order to save Mark's life by having a quickie with him in a coffin. She learns to give up on wanting things to be right and perfect and does what she's got to do for the greater good. Is that something she needed to learn? Was she being selfish by wanting things her way before? Kids, When it comes to your body and your sexuality, you are allowed to be selfish. They should not be about anyone but you. This is not a good message movie. Yes, Robin wants to have sex, but she does it under duress, not the way she really wants to at all. There is something to be said about learning that the intimacy of being with someone you love is much more important than candles and saxophone solos, and if that is what matters to her in the end, despite the film never giving us any indication of her reaching that emotional point, then I'm glad she's happy and satisfied. But now this is at odds with Mark's arc. Wasn't his arc that he needed to learn to wait and respect his girlfriend? He's the one who's punished for trying to rush it, punished for his promiscuity, and seems to be learning his lesson well. But instead of the end result being that Robin's wishes are respected, it pushes her to lose them even faster. So, no, none of this works. To what extent are 80s teen sex comedies meant to have messages or morals? Not much. They're comedies, but ultimately at the expense of the female characters when they're made by a team of men if they end up with the male protagonist finally getting laid. There are other vampires in this film. These live in the Countess's basement, and we can assume they're her former virginal victims. Though only one of them actually does anything for her. Of course, the only black character in the film is playing a servant. Cleavon Little, yes, this same Cleavon Little, plays her butler/chauffeur, Sebastian. See, even he has a name. Wait, I'm supposed to believe this bundle of awesomeness was a virgin? Clearly by choice. His campy, sassy performance has been criticized as homophobic, but Cleavon Little is just so amazing and confident in everything he does that he absolutely makes the most of these stereotypes. We don't get to see him do much as a vampire, but Sebastian is one hell of a butler. Competent, classy, and has infinitely more character depth than the Countess or other vampires whose personality traits are all only implied by their obvious time periods. On the subject of homophobia, besides a transphobic joke in the club scene, there's also this other scene in the film. Robin asks Mark's friends to check his crotch area for vampire bites. They try to do it in the shower at school, which results in a big gay scare gag. It's super 80s and downright excruciating to watch. The final punchline is when Mark asks them why they didn't just ask him instead of trying to look themselves, and the boys conclude that means they must be gay after all and their lives are over. But just in case the audience was concluding the same thing, don't worry. Both these guys, who have never had any luck with girls their entire lives, get scooped up by two nameless vampire babes at the end who exist for nothing other than to validate their masculinity. Everybody wins! Speaking of being a product of its time, this film also has the obligatory 80s teen movie dance-off scene. So, no authority figures at this high school are going to question why this lady is busting into a gym full of teenagers on school property as an obvious sexual predator? Well, is she hot? Then carry on! Once Bitten came out the same year as Fright Night, which definitely eclipsed its potential success. It was also released in November, despite being set at Halloween, so it's no wonder it didn't do well at the box office. But even if it had the best time release, there was no way it was going to be a vampire film for the ages. Of course, it's not necessary for a comedy to make a statement or have a deep message, but without them, a film isn't going to be memorable. It's not like Once Bitten presents varying points of view on sexuality for the audience to consider and develop their own opinions about. Each side of its conflicting message is presented as concrete and shallow. And let me tell you about vampires and shallow concrete, they don't mix. I don't know where I was going with that.
I haven't had anything this pure since the Vienna Boys Choir hit town.
Like this line. The character established earlier that eating children was icky for her. But then we have jokes like this tossed in. Good comedy should come out of the established characters and rules of the universe, not conflict with them.
I can't believe you're willing to throw away our relationship on a one-night stand with a chauffeur and a butler and a slut who eats buttons.
I can't believe it either. Like, nothing in Mark's character shows me he'd do that. But it's the entire premise of the film, so it's gotta happen. And Jim Carrey's sweet sincerity hurts more than it helps in this case. If he's just so nice and innocent and clueless that he'd do this stupidly, then why is this the first time in 4 years that he's made a mistake like this? It doesn't add up. But luckily for him and the plot, Robin sure gets over it easily. The fact that the Countess is a predator makes him forgivable? This movie doesn't stand out in the history of vampire film because it doesn't do anything fresh with the vampires. The big twist here is that the vampire is a woman instead of a man going after a virginal boy. But other than that, it plays on tropes and visual shortcuts instead of presenting any new ideas or metaphors. Again, compare it to Fright Night. Equally 80s and cheese-tastic, but its vampire message was socially relevant. Vampires are symbols, foils for humanity. And even if your vampire is 100% cliche and classic and doesn't have any new tricks, all you have to do is have them represent an aspect of humanity and then examine society through that lens. But this film doesn't even do that. One thing I can say is that, well, the vampires here are definitely the bad guys. Despite the fact that they're silly and never actually kill anyone, it's very clear that none of the human characters in the film are tempted to become them. They are all horrified and disgusted by vampires as a given. However, the film's presentation of vampires is at odds with the characters' reactions. To the audience, they're cool and beautiful and sexy and fabulous and fun. It looks like it would be awesome to be one of them. And it's films like these, my friends, that we have to thank for a certain type of vampire fan. The vampire wannabes. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and well, I wouldn't know anything about that. Once bitten, you won't feel no pain, once bitten. You know, sometimes I like to dress like this, and sometimes I like to wear something a little low-cut and sexy. Did you know of a Patreon? I don't know if I've ever told you. I have a Patreon. You should join. You should also like this video, subscribe to my channel, leave me comments, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook. Just follow me, please.